Welcome back on JoyNews Desk. Thank you for staying. Now, we take you back to the Ecowas summit, and any moment from now, the opening session will kick off. We're going to be giving you snippets of that and what to expect. But earlier, when I was engaging my colleague, Elton Brobe, he made mention of the fact that Dr. Osibanjo, Vice President of Nigeria, had arrived at the Kempinski Hotel. So had George Oponweah, President of the Republic of Liberia, among other members of ECOWAS who are expected. We do know that the Foreign Affairs Minister, Shirley Ayoko Botche, is going to be there. There is no representation from Guinea. They are going to communicate whatever message they have to the ECOWAS ecosystem, so to speak. No representation from Mali as well. But what are we looking forward to this morning and in the course of the day as they meet till around 4 p.m. I'm joined by Winston Amwa and Raymond Akwa, my colleagues right here in the studio. Gentlemen, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So some pretty interesting turn of events in recent times. We've had two coups within a short space of time. And in Guinea, it's been characterized by celebrations like we saw, people pouring out on the streets. And now we have this special summit that ECOWAS has put together. Winston, I'll start with you. Some have said that all this bit about summits being organized and all of that may not tackle the root problem. People have started from the end of Alpha Condé himself having amended the constitution to suit what he wanted. Do you feel that is a good starting point to kickstart the conversation?
Well, when you do that, it's more of justifying the situation that Guinea finds itself in. Now, I'm not interested in justifying the actions. Of course, the actions of Alpha Condé were not the best. And you need to ask yourself the question also. ECOWAS is very keen on suspending members when they go through, when there's a coup d'etat. But what did ECOWAS also do? We've heard from our Foreign Affairs Minister saying ECOWAS actually impressed upon Alpha Condé not to do what he did. Now, could they have also cracked the whip on him when he started making plans to amend the constitution less than 6 months to the elections? They could have done that. So ECOWAS in itself needs to do a bit of stock taking. I think that the evidence on the ground has suggested that the group which has become more of a gathering of heads of state sometimes wait to act after the fact.
Right. They're not proactive. They're very reactive.
No, they're not proactive.
The thing happens, and now you
try to...
They're
very reactive. They're very reactive. Without justifying what has happened in Guinea, this could have been prevented. Okay, it could have been prevented.
How exactly do you feel this could have been prevented?
Well,
because like our Foreign Affairs Minister has said, they made attempts to convince Alpha Condé not to go this way. But you know that we are dealing with sovereign states, and you basically cannot dictate to a country or its leader what to do.
So I mean, they're not dictating. But you've suspended Guinea, okay? Now, the point is, at the time he was engaging in that, your laws, your rules are clear. 6 months to the conduct of elections, you do not amend constitutions like the way Alpha Condé sought to do. You could have, imposed sanctions on him when he was doing that.
At least something could have been done to show some will.
Now, impressing upon him and he not listening, if you had shown clearly that, well, we're against this. Look, the point is not being against a fair term. Okay, the point is making sure that even if you want to take that decision, you take it within the stipulated time and what the ECOWAS rules would permit. That's not what happened. So?
But it's interesting you make this point because our very own president, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, has right next to us the Ivory Coast, and their president, Alassane Ouattara, is his friend. But we've also seen, Raymond, what has happened in the Ivory Coast. Similar situation, a third-term bid, practically side by side with what we're seeing in Guinea. A proposal for it, amendment of the constitution, referendum, and all of that. What is different? I mean, we've sat down, we've been watching these things happen. How different is that from what we're seeing in Guinea?
The problem with how ECOWAS engages has always been that the basis for the engagement has been problematic. One, the protocol on good governance and democracy itself is problematic. We basically have given ourselves a slight modification of a loose entanglement of a union, which has very little powers, which can flex its muscle but cannot do much. And yet we call on it to do more when it cannot do much. Let me give you a reason why. The protocol states that, yes, every accession to power should be through free and fair elections. I wonder how many countries in the sub-region can really be proud that they conducted free and fair elections. That's problematic. What then is left to you when a country you purport or you think has not conducted free and fair elections? What's left to you is to bring it to the committee of your colleagues, including a gentleman that has gone through that process you feel is not free and fair, like they're going to do now.
Right.
We, again, gave ourselves a protocol that is imprecise on how to deal with problems like that. So everything looks at a political solution, predominantly. And that is where the problem is. For example, the EU's own similar protocol, 259 is clear. They call it the 259 provisions. 259 can guarantee Ghana the right to take on Côte d'Ivoire at the Ecowas, what they call it, courts, and say, Côte d'Ivoire is amending laws and acting in a way that's unconstitutional and also not democratic. We need to check it so that we don't breed the kind of things we don't want in the sub-region. We don't have similar structures in Ecowas. And even if the court had decided, how binding would that ruling have been on Côte d'Ivoire, for example? Okay. Unlike in other unions, and I'm comparing Ecowas, EU here. So at the basis of all of this problem is the fact that we gave ourselves very almost empty laws and pretended it will work, and gave the people who really are not bent on being democratic the power to control the processes like they're going to gather and discuss today. So in effect, it's more like we feared the impact of giving so much power to ECOWAS on the sub-region.
And now we're sort of reaping the
reward
of that.
And yet, when there are serious issues happening in countries, we call on the same loosely constituted union to act with the powers you have not given them.
So it's like a pretty dicey situation, a catch-22 situation, if you like. But from what you're saying, then I see that ECOWAS is sort of a toothless bulldog when it comes to such situations. And that the leaders themselves, because we have the AU setting where you might see a broader, consensus, and maybe even more, because ECOWAS in itself is more economic.
Yes.
You get it. Yeah. But AU might have greater leanings. But then I also see that the leaders themselves, from what you're saying, don't have the moral high ground based on what they themselves are doing in their countries. And that makes it tricky for them to be able to reach out to another person who is doing something to say, look, this must not go on.
Imagine that somebody in any of the countries in our sub-region, including Ghana, goes to Côte d'Ivoire or even Guinea and say that, no, but you are not actually implementing all the elements of our protocol, including the ones that say that the freedom of the media shall be guaranteed, including the ones that say that the accession to power should only be to free and fair elections.
And across the sub-region, all of them have had their problems with free and fair elections.
If you are reviewing elections,
right,
I'm sure a few would survive. So it's almost like, I know you are doing this, I'm also doing something similar, but let's just keep quiet. The problem is that we are not giving the commission itself, the ECOWAS Commission, enough powers to act as an independent body, checking the various states. Like I have cited the EU has the powers to do, so that much of what you expect to be done is that the Commission will protect the interest of individuals. Like the way we say, we the members of the United Nations, as in me, an individual, Winston, an individual, you, an individual, so that the United Nations can be invoked to protect our interests as individuals, not as people belonging to states. Interests that can be protected even against my state. I hope you are getting my point. So we are really demanding more than we should be from a union that we have not given the powers to do so. More importantly, it's because we are not having the moral authority to do some of these things.
Okay.
And it happens consistently. When you heard a response from the Foreign Affairs Minister, and I agree with her, what else could you have done differently?
Right.
Beyond impressing upon the man and saying that if you do this may cause problems. The writings were on the wall and all of that. You could really not have had, let's say, heads of state come together and say, we are going to sanction you. Who are those going to do that? Cote d'Ivoire? Because it's in the process of doing a similar thing, or might have had interest in doing something similar. Check the other countries. Human rights abuses, what they call it, abuse of constitutional provisions, and all of the things happen. Let's go back to 2011 and the issues that happened with Ivory Coast, for example. You see the response of ECOWAS. It was unlike how it had responded in other situations, because Ivory Coast was peculiar and a strong body. Assuming Nigeria had done a similar thing, the response would have been different. So it's not...
And Nigeria, of course, being the major power in the sub-region. I mean, even dealing with them on these things is problematic.
We have not put together a strong ECOWAS. We cannot demand of a loose body the powers of a strong body.
Okay, let me quickly come to Winston on this one. And in case you're just joining the conversation, it's a confab we're having on the 7-member team that is meeting, ECOWAS team that is meeting on the back of what is happening in Guinea. And we'll be bringing you snippets of that, the details from there, especially as the heads actually converge right here in Accra. But let me come to you, Winston. Do you agree with Raymond when he makes the point that we have sat down, these things have happened time and again, and ECOWAS itself, properly so-called, is not armed, clothed with the sort of power to handle such situations? Because what that would mean then is that, like we've seen in the case of Mali, where there was a second coup, in this instance, it could be that all of this is stillborn because it may not, like some analysts have suggested, amount to much.
Well, I wouldn't say they can't do anything. They can do certain. They can do a lot of things, but the question is.
But let's be practical.
Hold on.
They can do a number of things. What in practical terms?
So I am getting.
Apart from maybe proposing sanctions.
I am getting to the practicality of it. The question is, because you have certain persons and who are key blocks within ECOWAS doing the same thing that others are doing, sometimes it becomes a problem. And we saw, a similar situation happen in Togo some time ago, when it comes to, a standing stay. Foreign Yasingbe did the same thing. We've seen it happening in Ivory Coast. And so when you're faced with such a situation, the question is now, these same countries that have done similar things, will they have the moral grounds to be criticizing or condemning what Guinea is doing? But, well, we've seen ECOWAS suspending members. We've seen it suspending Mali. We've seen it suspending Guinea following the military takeover. So that in itself, for me, is an indication that they could do a few things, okay? Except that it's become a body where like-minded people, when I say like-minded people, it looks like in a part of the world, when people get into office, it becomes difficult for them to leave unless sometimes they're pushed out. I mean, that in itself is not a bad thing if the people vote for you or if your constitution allows it. But when you decide to change your constitution just because you want to stay on, and the protocols are very clear, it should involve all political actors. But if that is not done and you are doing so at one man's whims and caprices, that's where the issue starts from.
And that's where the issue starts from. But I'm going to start off from a point you made mid, submission. And it has to do with ECOWAS imposed sanctions.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be a bit devious here and ask, and then what? We saw it in Mali. And if you look at the situation, we would often have these instances where sanctions are imposed or at least threatened, then imposed, and then what? It appears the countries can simply, these coup makers can simply go ahead with their lives until whatever point arrives when they decide, okay, we're handing over to civilian rule. And even then, they can come back like we saw in Mali. So sanctions, yes, but it appears beyond that, ECOWAS may be seeming to be a bit of a toothless bulldog in a way when it comes to these instances.
Well, if ECOWAS were very powerful, and I'd agree that ECOWAS, not the kind of a body you would
economic.
Yeah, but if they were very powerful, if you're suspended from the economic community of West African states, you should feel it. Because you have a very large market, and so if you're any country that produces and you can't have access to that market, you're guaranteed free movement of goods and services. If you're denied all of these, you should feel it in your country. Unfortunately, we've even seen instances where, with all of these in place, countries have decided to close their borders. It's become an issue back and forth here and there. And we've also seen lots of smuggling along our borders. They're very porous in itself. And so you ask the question whether these sanctions really hurt. The evidence suggests to me they just don't hurt as much as would compel these countries to do the right things.
Right. We're looking at ECOWAS in sharp focus, but on the back of this, we've seen the AU also, have its own proposals as far as this is concerned. I know the focus is on ECOWAS, but I just want us to take a quick swipe at the AU. What do you feel? Do you feel, especially on the back of what we're saying, that ECOWAS seems not to be clothed with a sort of power to actually bring to bear some of the action that those of us seated at this table feel should be coming to bear?
So
is the AU also failing in this respect? How do we stretch these issues?
The ECOWAS protocol on good governance and democracy mirrors the AU protocol on good governance and
not
democracy.
much.
It's basically the same. And let's be fair, invading a state, it's sovereignty, and seeking to impose ideas and ideals on them have always been difficult. Let's not forget that. There are questions that will be raised about why are you interfering, and where the intervention is required. What will be the criteria? Now, one of the things that has happened over the years is that the AU has mostly deferred to the regional blocs, and it's for good reason. You don't want to be seen as
an overweening, overbearing
yes.
character.
They'll push back. Instead of they helping you fix the problem in Guinea, ECOWAS may more be interested in pushing back against a bigger bloc's attempt to influence. So it is always the first and maybe wonderful step to let the neighbors, direct neighbors, seek to solve the problem. The wisdom in that is that they understand the commonalities in the region, and they are more likely to be the ones talking to their colleague and getting solutions, which are mostly political solutions. We have known over the period that it has been difficult to marshal forces to do the things we want to do. So ideally, since the protocol is pretty clear on how you should get into power, and Article 45 talks about when there is an unconstitutional overthrow of government, what should happen? When they lay out the platform, ideally it should have included an option that had force inbuilt, because a threat to a section of ECOWAS would have been a threat to the entire ECOWAS.
In fact, a threat to one country is a threat to the entire region.
Yes, but the difficulty here is that you do not know whether you are solving a problem or creating more problems. And whenever we have tried, even with external help, to invade states that have had problems like this, we have not done it well. Look at how the handling of with external help.
But the fact that we've not done it well does not mean that that enterprise in itself is wrong. It's just the handling of it that has never been executed properly.
But there's never been a wonderful handling of a situation like that, because ordinarily, unless there's a massive crisis which involves human losses and all of that, you rarely want political issues to political problems.
Right.
Political solutions to political problems. Because ideally, that should be the way forward. And no bloc is so often so competent enough to deal with it without repercussions. And others pushing back and say, why are you intervening? So that's where the difficulty has always been. So the interventions have been more from external powers. Let's say the French in Ivory Coast being the stronger hand helping Ivory Coast to deal with what it dealt with previously, than having a bigger body come in and do more than that. And again, the reactionary part of this is that you have to wait for the crisis to get worse before you can really, really intervene. So as we have it in Guinea right now, your best options are purely civilian conversations where the people are asking them to go around the scene. For example, if I'm just giving you the exact things that the Article 45 says, it says, in the event that democracy is abruptly brought to an end by any means, or where there is massive violation of human rights in a member state, ECOWAS may impose sanctions on the state concerned. The sanctions, which shall be decided by the authority, may take the following forms in order of severity. 1. Refusal to support the candidates presented by the member states concerned for elective posts in international organizations. First one. Second one. Refusal to organize ECOWAS meetings in the member states concerned. 3, suspension of the member state concerned from all ECOWAS decision-making bodies. During the period of the suspension, the member state shall be obliged to pay its dues for the period. During the period of suspension, ECOWAS shall continue to monitor, encourage, and support the efforts being made by the suspended member state to return to normalcy and constitutional order. And the last one says, on the recommendation of the Mediation and Security Council, a decision may be taken at the appropriate time to proceed as stipulated at Article 45 of the protocol. And this is really what they are going to do today. So the options on your table,
all of that
is the highest they can
all
go.
of it put together, even all of it put together and imposed on Guinea is like a slap on the back, isn't it?
It is. But what is the options that they have today? These are the best things they can do so that they do not create more problem in Guinea.
Okay,
They
so
don't create civil war in
that
Guinea.
brings me to the second part. You know, you started your submission by saying that first off, ECOWAS can do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And I'd broached the subject of the African Union,
Yeah.
and you had made mention of the fact that even their protocols and what is expected
In fact, it's almost like that.
situations like this are sort of, they resonate.
Yes.
You get it. So beyond this, it appears there's a handicap. There's no moving forward, which also could imply that once people like Dumbuya know that this is the worst case scenario, we're sitting on a ticking time bomb, aren't we? We have problems.
I agree with you. Actually, there's a lot of research to suggest that the protocol and the handling of situations this way have led to reduction in coups. In fact, since 1990s up to this, in fact, 2/3 of the coups that used to happen are no longer happening. So there's some progress that's been made in the process. It is no longer a very fashionable thing to do these coups. And we know that's why we've not had some.
But it's
for a
coming
while.
back into vogue. In the 60s, we had a pattern.
yeah.
In the 80s, we had a pattern. And it sort of tapered off. It was in pockets of African countries.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, we hit the 21st century and we're back into, especially from around 2008, 2010 till now, we're back into that fray.
It is because we fail to deal with the fundamental issues. Whilst all of us are interested in they getting to this point, we also fail to get the point that it is not only when you remove governments that ECOWAS can intervene. When there is massive human rights crisis, ECOWAS can intervene.
Right.
When there is a constitutional government engaging in unconstitutional acts, ECOWAS can intervene.
And that,
If
is,
they have been,
that is where the debate comes
Yes.
in, because you see things that you would feel fall into that category, and yet
yeah, because they have failed ultimately
Exactly.
to be checks on each other because of the lack of moral authority from each of the countries.
and that is the major problem.
But I think the ultimate failure is our inability to resource the commission itself to act as an independent check on the bodies,
Okay.
on the various states, so that they can do the job that states cannot do against each other and do it properly.
You see, and the lack of the moral ground is what, for me, worries me. Because look, here we are seated and talking about Guinea. Now, could we have prevented the situation? Well, we spoke to Condé, we're told. Could ECOWAS have gone ahead to take the steps they're taking today to actually prove to Condé that we are not in support of what you're doing? ECOWAS did not take that decision. Okay, so
And we wouldn't even have known about this engagement with Condé had it not
Yes.
come to this point where
So-
we've seen the worst case scenario.
So the point is, this is you after the fact, you're acting, I mean, you're reactive because the situation has happened already. Okay, and you look at the sanctions available to us, for instance, and these sanctions, let's be very honest. I mean, if I were a leader who loved power so much, I would say, well, I don't care. Go ahead and sanction me.
Imagine, let's say, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, or Nigeria suspended from ECOWAS. In fact, if you suspend Nigeria, you may have bigger problems.
Yes.
But if these three
I mean,
countries,
even financial problems.
yes. That's what
There
I'm
are
coming
real
to.
dynamics in here.
Yeah,
and it
that's what I'm
becomes
coming to. So
Big
it's,
brother Nigeria, you take them out, what is left? And what are you going to be doing?
But you see, that's very true. But the other point is that ECOWAS is beginning to look like a group of countries that have come together to protect the collective interest of their leaders.
yeah.
It is beginning to look like that. Okay? Because these are the economic community of West African states. We're in there to focus on the general well-being of our population. And that's why we talk about the free movement goods and persons, because we want to ensure that people can move from one country to the other, are able to do a few things that would enhance their livelihoods. Unfortunately, over the period, a lot of the things we have talked about have centered on when our leaders are meeting at extraordinary meetings, it has centered on having to discuss challenges in a country when it comes to their political situation, not economic issues. We are meeting most of the time to discuss political challenges. Yes, the politics would affect the economics, no doubt. But we should also be meeting to think about the economics more and not the politics affecting the economics. Yes,
One point, though, on that particular issue, I did a review of the protocol some time ago, and I'll read to you just what I wrote. I wrote that the latter part of the protocol focuses on issues of poverty reduction and the promotion of social dialogue, as well as a wider aspect of good governance and democracy. These are predominantly 29, Article 21 and 31. These issues are not encompassed within the framework of constitutional convergence. So they are not the things that they focus really on.
Yeah.
Right.
So they are like addendum. They are not the operative part of the protocol. So the people who put it together really did not mean to make them the most important things that you should focus on.
Right.
That your constitution, Ghana's constitution, all the other constitutions, so at least, at most, or without doubt, have this as important elements in there. How then do you get them to work at it? It means that right from the conception, there was not really an intent to make it a body of the people, through the people, and letting them be united the way or integrated the way they wanted.
So
protecting the rights of ordinary people, not necessarily protecting the rights of states and their leaders.
So the very fundamentals of a body like ECOWAS then means that there is some divergence instead of a convergence between what the people want and what the leaders at the helm are actually doing. It resonates with what you were saying, they appear to be doing one thing, but what the people want, and that is what we are seeing in Guinea, people pouring out on the streets with the ousted Guinean president at the back of a vehicle, and they are actually hooting at him, they are saying all kinds of things.
And you know what, you see, for example, ordinary people, if you ask me, people are thrown between, on one hand, Conde's conduct was inappropriate.
Right.
But on the other hand, you don't want to really support.
No, definitely not.
Especially to support two military. So you're thrown between.
A coup is always bad. Though we've had, Dr. Etua of the University of Ghana faculty talk about how they could be
unsuccessful.
A coup is exactly. And when you get caught, then
but you see, the point is the dicey nature of this situation is that, I mean, if you say yes, Conde is wrong, he's wrong. Now, when you do some of these things, you invite...
Two wrongs don't make a right.
These things, but two wrongs don't make a right. That's why I say we should have prevented Conde from doing that. Unfortunately for us, we are in a body that lacks the moral high ground to do some of these things. And let me borrow the words of the late former president, Jerry John Rawlings. The moral high ground that you need to condemn some of these things, the body lacks it. But I say, look, as the leaders are meeting, and I know some of them are watching even as they get ready, it's important that the leaders will focus on the economic community. Let us begin to focus on the things that really matter to us as a people. How, as a nation, how as a bloc, we can come together and enhance the livelihoods of our population. That, for me, is the most important thing. And let it not be like a cult of, political leaders always thinking about themselves.
Well, we'll be coming back into the studio with our gentlemen here, Winston and Raymond. Will be sharing more thoughts. But right now we connect with Elton Brobe, who is actually on the ground, and now the session is about to kickstart. Elton, so who have arrived thus far, and what should we be expecting in the next few minutes?
Right, so it's almost just about starting. President Akufo-Addo just entered the conference room. And once he's seated, the event will be called to order. So we have President Akufo-Addo as chair of ECOWAS. Also in attendance is the president of Togo, Fanya Singbe. And then Alassane Ouattara, president of Côte d'Ivoire. Also, president of Cape Verde is also in attendance. Adama Barrow, the president of the Republic of Gambia, is also here. His Excellency Patrice Talon, President of the Republic of Benin, is also here. Rochmark Christian Kabore, the President of Burkina Faso, is also present. General Umaru Siseko Embalo, the President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, as well as Mohamedou Bazoum, the President of the Republic of Niger. So these are the presidents who are in attendance today. There are also representatives from other countries. So we have the Vice President of Nigeria, Dr. Osibanjo, representing President Muhammadu Buhari, and then foreign ministers from other two countries that are also here. Mason is representatives from Mali and Guinea. I guess the reason is very much, in a couple.
Okay, so shortly we shall have the commencement of this session, and we shall proceed from there. We're just awaiting the leaders to actually converge, and the session will start. You were making a point right before we had to go to Elton about some of the flaws in the system, but it also brings to mind some of what we should be looking forward to. In Mali, we had timelines given, then there was that second coup. In Guinea, one problematic area is we don't know what's the aims moving forward of this illegitimate group really are. Of course, they have made bare known to all of us the very foundation which we've seen time and again, the economic situation, unemployment, and corruption, and all of those matters. But we don't even know, in a country which is also very rich with natural resources, now they're in the hands of the military, and we don't know what their chief aims are.
Ecowas made sure that Yahya Jammeh left office. He left.
But look at the nature of what happened and what it took. No, Winston, let's face the facts.
He left office.
Yahya Jammeh, I don't think he's the best example to cite in. I don't know what you think.
No. What I mean is that he left office eventually. When he sought to rerun the election.
Through which means?
He said that elections were flawed. And so there should be another election.
When he lost to Adama Barrow?
Yes, he left. He left office.
In Cote d'Ivoire.
Well, I'm not in Cote d'Ivoire. I'm using the good examples. I'm using the good examples to make a point.
Yeah, but it was easier because it's Gambia.
Yeah, exactly. But I want to make a point.
Much smaller country.
Yes, and the point I want to make.
Not too many.
The point I want to make is that, first of all, beyond the condemnation, and I'm not even happy how they've dealt with the Malian and the Guinean situations. Yeah. You condemn it and say, return to civilian rule. If there's an elected president, you tell those people there to leave office. That should be the beginning of the conversation.
You tell which people to leave?
The military to leave office.
Right.
The beginning of the conversation.
But if I recall, the initial statement from ECOWAS did say that there should be some restitution, Alpha Condé should be released, and that the military should cede office, which would then imply that perhaps Alpha Condé had to be restored to office. After all, even if we are following the pattern, he was constitutionally
to democratic rule. I am saying
elected.
Be very certain. Be straightforward. Let me not subject your statement to interpretation and say it implies this. Let us just see it, that reinstate this man as the president of the republic.
Because from what the situation is now, the practical reality of it is that even if there are going to be elections held in there, likely Alpha Condé is not going to be one of the contenders.
You see, was Alpha Condé's referendum democratic? Did he win a third term?
We've tell you yes?
Yes. Is he the democratically elected president of Guinea? Despite the flaws, he should be the president. Unless we want to say, well, Alpha Condé, now that we have a chance, we're also telling you that you did not do the right thing. And so hand over to a transitional team to superintend an election.
So this appears to be a conversation, Ray, about the tenets of democracy versus the reality of democracy. After all, what is democracy? A government of the people, by the people, for the people. Is that what the Guineans actually have?
But to be fair, ECOWAS cannot use any form of realpolitik in this case. ECOWAS has a protocol that tells them what to do. The protocol is pretty clear, because if they are going to be basing their decisions on what they consider to be realities, there's no way. Why? What makes you think that you decide the reality one country against the other? So this should be applicable. That's why the protocol is pretty clear about what should happen. The protocol is clear and stipulates that every accession to power, And every stay in office should be only by constitutional means.
Exactly.
So, and again, we are pretending that on one hand, when there is a removal of the man, it is so unconstitutional that when the person is misbehaving in office, that one is constitutional. We know that both are not right. We know that when you want to handle the situation, you start by first referring to what your protocol says. So his perpetuation of himself in power was wrong. We can't restore him to power. That's what people tell him in the face. And that solving the problem includes asking Conde to step aside too.
Exactly.
Yes.
Which is what I was insinuating, that even if elections are held today, Alpha Conde, I mean, so to speak, looking at the flow of events, is not going to be anywhere near.
Brilliant. As somebody who has abused the system, they should be bold enough to tell not to contest that particular election again. So they can move on with other leaders. Conde is not the repository of all knowledge in the country.
Let me play devil's advocate.
As a point in 83,
let me play devil's advocate.
83, at a point you lose the company.
Let me play devil's advocate.
Yeah, but before
now in trying to be democratic, or at least set the example of restoring democracy and not, letting the saw of these putsches or coup d'etats fester. If Alpha Conde were restored to office, let's just create that scenario. What do you feel that would mean? What signal would it send as far as ECOWAS is concerned?
Let me first of all make the point here that I started by saying that because Alpha Conde did not use the right means.
But it goes back to what you're saying.
Yes, hold on.
Constitutionally,
So I said,
the amendment was made, the referendum was had.
But I said, so the ECOWAS letter, should be very categorical. And I am saying that we could have also told these people to get out and put in a transitional team. But you see, Alpha Conde, the point is, the man has done himself a lot of disservice. You understand?
And we should be telling African leaders who act like they are demigods, that without them, states cannot run, that the states were made for them, that they are basically the ones who are supposed to convert everything, which they have not done anyway. Guinea is not a star nation. It's actually a struggling state.
And it's a nation sitting on so many resources.
Yes. So Alpha Conde is no hero, no role model, no successful person in any form.
Alpha Conde should not be running as president again. Now that he's been asked to step aside. Now that he's been overthrown, unfortunately. Because it's obvious from what has happened that he's not the person that people would want to see as their president.
But he has an unfinished term.
He has an unfinished
a legitimate
term.
unfinished
term. An unfinished term.
After the legitimacy is in doubt.
Well, you see, here's the problem, though. When it comes to some of these matters, we've spoken about the people pouring out on the streets in support. But the other angle is those people you may not be seeing.
Maybe the silent majority.
Maybe the silent majority.
So, see,
maybe those people who were very happy with what was going on.
Yes. So you see, the point here, the dilemma we find ourselves in, is that here is a man who violates the protocols to organize a referendum to become president for a third term.
To wait, the Section 1, Article 1D, which says that there should be zero tolerance for power obtained or maintained by unconstitutional means.
Exactly.
He maintained the power by unconstitutional means.
So listen, it says...
But this is a governing principle.
Not just maintained,
he
obtained.
Yes.
Well,
listen,
if we are to stick
listen,
to
it says,
what
the Article 1 says, B says, every accession to power must be made through free, fair, and transparent elections. C, zero tolerance for power obtained or maintained by unconstitutional means. D, popular participation in decision-making, strict adherence to democratic principles, and decentralization of power at all levels. And it continues to say, the armed forces must be apolitical and must be under the command of a legally constituted political authority. No serving of the armed forces, no serving member of the armed forces may seek to run for political office. The point I am making is Conde himself violates some of these things. You see, and that's what the problem is. So, at this point in time, yes, this could dominate the conversation we're having, but the country must move on. And if the country must move on, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya should not be in office saying that he's the president of Guinea or he's the head of state. He should not be there. We should be telling him, look, just as they started with the Malian situation and got the man out, and by telling him that it should not be led by you, you shouldn't be part of it. Doumbouya, Colonel Doumbouya, Lieutenant Colonel Doumbouya, should not be there.
Okay.
We must not encourage people like that.
He shouldn't be there.
I am looking forward to the time, just briefly, where what happened in Guinea could be contested at the Ecowas courts. That court has the powers to make a final determination of this matter and say, Condé, you got into power and maintained it illegally. Step aside. Let there be fresh elections. Let there be restitution of power. Unless that body exists, it will be continually very difficult for any grouping to assert the authority that you have to assert outside and still use a legitimate process to do so. A judicial body that ends at the ECOWAS level. I am looking forward to that particular period where when after that ECOWAS court has ruled and this military or Condé perpetuates himself in power, there can be a standby force from ECOWAS saying that we have the authority and the command to restore power. Then we can actually get the states happening. But until that time, it will just be the usual talk shop. It will just be the usual political solutions that everybody who can pick up guns in the sub-region knows is wrong. And yet they know they'll come back to debate. They'll come back to the same table. And you give them a period of time. They'll give you excuses like we are doing in Cote d'Ivoire and the other places and extend the period that they're supposed to stay in office. It really is unending if there are no clear examples of how the process ends in ultimate use of force to get action.
Let's talk about Condé himself. When you look at the situation in this country, there are good and bad. The economy, in 2020 growing at about 4%, a projection in 2021 of about 5.2%. You would say that economically speaking, they are not faring badly. But the people on the streets might have a different picture to paint. But then you put that side by side with the fact that a lot of people were incarcerated. You noticed in the days following the coup, they started a stream of, daily evacuations of the prisons, political prisoners, among others. The man Condé, and looking at his pluses and minuses.
One of the things, and I'm going to say something that I know would be very controversial.
What is that?
But, when I look at economic indicators, they're good. The macro is very important in every... But the micro,
did you say the macro or the micro?
Macro. The macro is very important. But the micro is equally important.
No, it's the micro that really reflects what people are feeling.
So you see, the macro is the aggregate. It tells you this is
the overall picture.
Overall picture of the country. Not a bad thing at all. I mean, it tells you, all things being equal, how you're going to be feeling.
But what is the distribution?
That's the most important thing. And so for me, while we look at the macro and take certain decisions, because the macro would also lead to decisions which would affect the micro. And that's why I say the macro is very good. But at the end of it all, you look at yourself and say, what is my condition? Look, and for me, that's what really matters. And I think that, yes, Condé was one professor who had contested elections and lost in the past. And when Lassana Conté died, it presented an opportunity for a fresh path for Guinea. He was given a chance to serve. Unfortunately, this man dug his own grave. Okay, and that's why I started by saying he did a great disservice to himself. The moment you begin to fight the people who expect you to serve them or better their livelihoods, you're telling yourself that you don't have to be here. I'm not saying people cannot criticize. People can criticize you. And when people criticize, there are some who may be very mischievous. But irrespective of that, when people are being mischievous, let the society be what? The judges. Let the society judge whether they are being mischievous or whether they are right. When you begin to incarcerate them and abuse their rights, you're telling people that I do not have any business being your leader. And we have seen the military take advantage of these things consistently, saying when the elite is not fighting for the people, the military cannot sit aloof and sit unconcerned. We must be there for the people. He brought this upon himself, unfortunately.
Now, there's another very tricky area, maybe even a gray area. You go back to 2010, when Condé himself, that transition, assumed the reins of power. Coup to transition.
First democratically elected.
And that transition...
I feel that that's why he's a betrayal of the process that brought him to the seat.
Some have said exactly that. Yeah. But that brings to mind another problem. When you look at the sort of support that the military has got on the back of this, it's problematic because in that instance, we had a transitional period lasting between 18 to 24 months. That is a long period. Now, if you look at what ECOWAS has been saying and some timelines that have been put out there, it means that we could be in for the long haul, contrary to what ECOWAS might be looking forward to, which could then imply that Doumbouya, whatever sanctions may be imposed,
you should hand over to a transition.
It may mean that he may end up being there for longer, just as we are seeing with Assimi Goïta in Mali.
No, you see, mostly how you manage these transitions require a lot more political tact. You want to save lives. You don't want any bloodshed. You want limited casualties if there's any coming out of it. And power corrupts. The more military people perpetuate themselves in power, the more they commit the sins that they came to correct.
And just to chip in this bit, Guinea's mineral resources contribute about 35% of GDP. Now those mineral resources are at the disposal of, guess who? The military.
Yeah. So the more they taste the goodness of civil power, they actually end up perpetuating it. So, and there are examples from Ghana to other places and all of that. So the quicker they can hand over power and get back to the barracks, the protocol is pretty clear that they are not supposed to be running for office or even be as military people. They're not supposed to be running the state in those capacities, but they end up doing it along the line. We need a smarter group of people who are negotiators from the regional body, who will go in there and help the process, not be antagonistic, not be threatening sanctions. They should be able to help transition nicely from what is a brief taste of power to a permanent control in power. That is what we should not allow that military to do, because we have learned from other places that it brings along with it huge repercussions, from human rights to having to erode all the successes the country has made over the period. But what else could be done differently? I think what has happened, which will work, is not only at the AU level. The French should get involved. This time around, they should not get involved with only their interests at heart. They should get involved in resolving a problem because of the ties they have with the Francophone West Africa.
Is that not a very slippery slope? Because we've seen the French get involved in other instances right here in Francophone West Africa, and there has been talk even from the analysts that those interferences were not needed. In fact, they were referred to as, just as I'm putting them, interference, unwarranted interference.
Their involvement can be interventions and not interference. The difference here in be that one is positive, the other is negative, and one is mostly not warranted. Now, their intervention should be this way. Because some of these Francophone countries, their economies are intertwined or related to that of the French because of their colonial ties, they can best help. The sanctions that the French may put on Guinea may be of more effect than that of ECOWAS, and that's what we cannot discuss.
That I agree.
Yes.
That I agree with.
So if there was going to be proper sanctions, and Guinea will feel it today, it will be with the help of the international community. They backing ECOWAS in doing this job. That's why I think the French will do us a good, what they call representation, by departing from what has been the previous position where it looks at its interest first, before looking at what the generality of the community can get. In this case, it can help us impose proper sanctions and coerce Guinea into a transition that will work quickly. And that's what we need. We also need to generally reform the structures we have used for our interventions over the period. I mean, becoming blunt that, oh, well, we try and suspend it and all of that. If right from the beginning, any African state knows fully well that the sanctions are not only going to come from West African colleagues who are really not trading among each other, who are only preventing you from attending their meeting, who are only preventing the people in your country from taking up positions in their own, it's not really something important to them. But if they fear the French will sanction you, if they fear your planes cannot land in any other country, if they fear that you're going to be locked in and the world's going to abandon you, no proper leader would want to live in such a state. And so they'll open up and seek to transition into a proper life that they want for their people. That's if they want a proper life for their people. Ultimately, I am opposed to any system, and which is all happening all the time. The sanctions only affect ordinary people in Guinea and not the people you are targeting. So Condé and the military leadership will end up being cozy and fine and okay. But the people who will really be affected by food shortages and all the other difficulties that happen through some of these sanctions is that of the ordinary person. That is where the difficulty is. We should be able to evolve a system where the targeted response will be to let the people who are at the helm of affairs feel it. They can't travel. Their families cannot travel. Their children also who are schooling and their families elsewhere are prevented from accessing funds.
A total clampdown.
Yes, on the individuals who are the problem, and not the entirety of the state, especially the poor people who did not contribute to the coup, who did not contribute to Conde's problems, and yet end up being the ones who are suffering at the end of the day. That evolution is what really a solution should be looking at.
That indeed is a very important point you made, because in the end, oftentimes they become the unintended casualties of these sanctions, when in fact they did not.
Poor people get poorer.
These actions.
They don't get access to fuel and all the other things that will make their lives meaningful. And the rich people kept the old
who could
rich,
afforded all of these things.
the old rich and the new rich continue to enjoy. And yet the people who are supposed to be beneficiaries of all of these sanctions, who are supposed to be beneficiaries of return to normalcy, end up still suffering.
Something else that I want us to look at, security in the sub-region. Of course, we are talking general security matters, but the ease of these coups. We saw what happened in Haiti with the assassination of their leader, and we all spoke about it and all of that. But have we asked ourselves how easy it was to get Conde to put him in a small corner, get him into that vehicle? The BASP is there. They are in support of Alpha Conde. And there are these other, the Red Beret forces. It almost is surreal, like something out of a movie, the way they were easily able to get 83-year-old Alpha Conde and, patrol him around.
1 minute.
And it's quite a situation I feel we should address.
Just 1 minute. It's because when you develop partisan security institutions, they are incapable of proper defense. For so many years, when Conde came in, the early years, there were no complaints about that. Later on, there were so many complaints about infiltrating the military and the proper defense teams with party people, just like happens in the sub-region, with recruitment and all of that. So they really weakened the base.
And that's a problem that even here we are facing. People talk about it time and again.
They weakened the base of the proper military. So at the time that they really needed them, half was compromised and the other half was really incompetent and incapable. So it was his own, as if he built it for himself, as if he deliberately orchestrated his fall from the beginning by acting in every single way that goes against him at the end of the day. But when he was doing that, and when the caution was coming along, there was an Ecowas security alert, what they call it, bulletin, that raised it nicely. In fact, one gentleman in Senegal spent quality time analyzing how that's going to affect him in the future. But of course, this became like just another economic talk, and it did not work with any change in that country. Here we are, having a guy whose previous security was supposed to be functional. And let's not get it wrong. Conde was New Dawn, celebrated, like the way many African leaders are celebrated and become the demons at the end of the day. New Dawn, democratic leader. I mean, we are going to make progress and all of that. But the reflection of what happened at the end of the day is just like the other demons and the principalities that affect the leaders, that make them more interested in entrenching themselves in power and forgetting about democratic institutions and yet getting into trouble. So, indeed, he brought it upon himself in this case by compromising his own security in the name of building a stronger, more loyal team to himself.
Right.
And that's where he ended up.
He shot himself in the foot. And just before you come in, Winston, just to corroborate what you're saying, you know what the BASP is? Bataillon Autonome de Sécurité Présidentielle. In other words, he had made the whole thing about himself.
His own battalion.
His own battalion.
Yeah.
You see,
Personal security. And this is what happens.
loyalty to the state and constitution is always better than people that you party loyal to. And I'll tell you why. Because look, when you have somebody coming in and saying, I don't like this man, if that person is not loyal to the state and its constitution, they get you out. And that's what we've seen when it comes to Conde's situation. But it also tells us one thing. Look, we say that insurgencies are always attempts to reverse an asymmetrical relationship in a country. Okay, asymmetrical. It means that it is not fair in a country. And for every insurgency to succeed, it must have the backing of the people, particularly the middle class. And there should be a ground for that insurgency. there should be happenings within the country that could trigger that insurgency. It's the reason why when Che Guevara tried what happened in Cuba, in other parts of the world, he was arrested.
Right.
Because that theory of start an insurgency, people will follow you, hardly works anywhere. But when you bring things upon yourself, let me give you a typical example. I just want to use this one to then I'll come back to the sub-region. When you look at the Bolshevik revolution of 1970.
That's an interesting one to go to.
Yes. Yes, it will tell you that, I mean, at the time, Tsar Nicholas had lost it. And so the people had the support, these insurgents had the support of the people. You ask yourself, didn't Alpha Condé lose it? Did he not lose it? He started as the new dawn of Guinea. Did he not lose it? The Malian situation is there for all of us to see. Some will describe these men as terrorists getting into the country. Eventually, the evidence on the ground in the Malian situation was that the head of state had lost control over the country. So clearly, these are lessons you can learn from. But a major case of insecurity or a major threat to security is the economic situation of the people. It is one thing we must look at. Whenever we have discussions about security of the people, when we're talking about security, we should also look at the state of people's livelihoods. It's one thing that actually triggers a state of insecurity in any sub-region or in any country. If you look at the West African sub-region, can it be said that as a people, we're actually pursuing the interest of the masses in our various countries? Unfortunately, that is not the situation. And when you do not do that, over time, you begin to create an asymmetrical relationship. Because then the people begin to ask themselves the question, why am I like this and why is he like that? And over a period, people begin to target those they believe are the causes of their problems. So look, one of the best counterinsurgency theories was what the British used in Asia at the time, Malaysia and Singapore and all of those things. What did they do? When they realized that people were talking to each other to ensure that, times are hard and all of that thing, you don't have any amenities and all of that, the British sought to disaggregate the people, but also they sought to build the very things that the insurgents were promising them. So we are creating the very things they say you do not have. We're beginning to talk to you and say, these are the things we're doing for you. And so it is not as bad as they paint it. My point simply is, the sub-region, yes, there's some sort of state of insecurity, also because the very people we've put in there who have promised they're going to serve us, the evidence on the ground suggests that they are serving us and amassing wealth as though they would die tomorrow. So they have to do everything today. It's like their lives are coming to an end. Look, I was in Takrady over the weekend, and one of the conversations we had, somebody said something. He said, I don't like Galamsey leaders. I asked, what do you mean by I don't like Galamsey leaders? He says, I don't like leaders who come into office just to amass wealth. I like people who come into office with plans to improve the general well-being of the society. Right. Unfortunately, if I could borrow the words of my friend Asiedu Kokro, we're having a group of Galamsey leaders who are coming in to amass wealth. When you do that, you're only going to create a state of insecurity in the future.
Galamsey leaders, you say. That's an interesting term. But Guinea itself has quite an interesting history when it comes to all these coups d'etats and all that. In recent times, I've been engaging the likes of Captain Joe Kwame, the likes of Brigadier General Nuno Mensah, and they all point to one thing, that our leaders are failing at dealing with the core problems, like you were mentioning, Raymond. And because of these failures, if we are not careful, like Professor Enning has suggested, we could have some more of these putsches even before the close of year. Professor Enning has said that we might see 2. And how many months do we have left? So let's situate the conversation. Sekou Touré passed in 1984. Yeah. When we still had Rawlings. 1984. Once he passed, the military quickly swept in, took over from there. And it's interesting again because we always seem to have kennels in the mix when it comes to coup d'etats in Guinea. So Lansana Conte took over and was there till 2008 until this entire coup d'etat and transitional period enter Alpha Condé. And he seems to have repeated this vicious cycle where the military has stepped in again. I'll go back to that point I was making. So when you look at long military transitions and you look at the fact that even when the military has taken over, look at 1984 to 2008. That is about 24 years in between. Doesn't paint a good picture, does it?
Let's be fair. It's as if we're a different breed of people. We are power drunk. Even the very best of us that sometimes you have hope in, we really want to entrench ourselves in power and abuse it.
It says
That
aphorism says power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton.
Yes, and you see, there's everything wrong with our people because we do not seek the power for the good of the larger majority.
Selfish gains.
I cannot single out a single country in the West African sub-region that is bent on and really concentrating on making sure that the power that the leadership will have ends up inuring to the benefit of the masses. It's almost like a clique. Be it through constitutional or unconstitutional means, they get into power. They change the fortunes of the people who are in power to the detriment of the larger majority, and they end up closing the space for dissent. They end up closing the space for freedom of speech, and they end up trashing opposition or anybody that says that you're not running it the wrong way.
Right.
I also feel, and this was how I actually feel personally, that perhaps the stakes have changed and the old people have not gotten it clearly. The signal for mostly young people are that they are dissatisfied with the kind of opportunities they have in a part of the world. They are also unable to move out because it requires resources and other things. They are basically choking in their own land because of how the states are being run. They see no opportunities for their future, and they would want to change that. It is problematic having very old people running the sub-region and yet not doing much for their grandchildren and the future of the sub-region. That is where the change ought to start from. If you are going to even keep non-democratic institutions in place, or you could transition to democratic institutions, regardless of what you're going to do, please, it should be in the interest of the people. It should be with guaranteeing the people basic things in life and let them have opportunities to spread out. The people, the young people in Africa, they are not special people. They are not less intelligent than those in the other parts of the world. They know it is because leadership has failed them. That is why they are where they are. And that's why the young people in Guinea were willing to jump around, because what do they have to lose anyway?
I mean, it was almost as though their political party or their leader had won.
Yeah, because they were suffering. They had hope. And look, virtually every West African story is like that. Hope dashed, then becomes suffering for a longer period. Then becomes like they don't know what to do again. They don't know whether the democracy is what they wanted or it's a different one they ought to experiment with, or they were better off even at the military rule. So when they get all of this thing coming through their head, they see a military man coming in, what do they tend to lose? And they only know that it is the people who are in power, their friends, their families who are enjoying.
Right.
They are the ones who have been changed. The ordinary people feel that it's a relief in the interim because one grouping that was
they're getting some reprieve.
Yeah.
Winston, and it goes back to the pattern that we've just painted. Indeed, when Lassana Conte also was, he also passed just as Sankara did. And once he passed, you have Musa Camara quickly stepping in with another coup d'etat, and we had Alpha Conde, which is why I agree with you that in a way it is a betrayal of the people of Guinea, the way things have gone, as far as Alpha Conde is concerned. But the people, the very people in Guinea, the picture we've got from them is that though they are rooting for the military and appearing to be in support, they're still afraid. They're still afraid because of this same vicious cycle we've spoken of, that they could get back into this spin.
Let's not mince words here. Military regime, with all intents and purposes, is a very difficult one to be under. Okay? And so you would want a civilian regime. But it's also because of what the military told them. You see, when the military takes over and tells you that we are aware of the challenges you're going through, and we want to right the wrongs of the past, the people are going to jump on and say, thank you for coming to our aid. Because the man we expected was going to deliver us from bondage is actually the one taking us into bondage. And that's the challenge. Look, you remember, I mean, all of us were not born then, but the history in 1979 would tell you how many people were excited at the time when the coup happened. Because at the time, they thought that was what Ghana needed at the time. Many people who jumped onto the streets. And so, why would the people of Guinea be excited? They'll be excited because they're unhappy with what Alpha Condé, the good old professor, has done. The man who had lost elections in the past and they thought was going to do something different, ended up repeating the same things that they never expected of him. My brother, look, they said a grandma will clutch at the straw. Why? Because he believes at that point in time that a straw could save his life. It is the same state that the people of Guinea find themselves in. Based on the disappointments they've had to go through, they would jump at this, hoping that this will spark a new era. If it doesn't...
Even if it means hoping against hope.
Exactly. If it doesn't, well, at least we've got one bad man out, hoping we don't have another bad person. And that's where the reliance on Ecowas at this point in time to right the wrongs by making sure a return to civilian rule is quick remains very key.
And that remains the key job of ECOWAS right now. But the ethno-linguistic dimensions to this cannot be overlooked. You know, in Guinea, the two major ethnic groups, Malinke and Pearl, and if you go back to Alpha Condé's main contender when it comes to elections, Diallo, you would see that there's been some sort of play. Do you know why at this juncture it becomes a bit tricky for ECOWAS dealing with the problem? Whether Malinke or Pearl, once Colonel Doumbouya came and said, I am expressing the will of the people, it appears now whether Malinke or Pearl, they are not looking at Condé or Diallo. They are looking at someone who is standing for them, the will of the people. And that is where it becomes tricky for an ECOWAS wading into the situation, because there seems to be somewhat of a united front behind a popular figure now, Colonel Doumbouya.
To be fair, if Doumbouya wants to be leader of what they call Guinea, he should transition to be a civilian. He has every right, if he does so, to contest elections, win elections, and actually become the leader of the country, even though it's not a very advised direct path to action. Military stays military, and they basically have to go back to the barracks because their long stay in office always has difficulties for the people. And that's without doubt. There is so much evidence to support that. The only problem here is that, and I fear that power has a way of corrupting those who have it, especially in our part of the world.
Who knows, even as we speak, it may be corrupting the elements in there.
Yes.
After having tasted power
when they
for
taste
a few
power
days
for
or a few
some time,
weeks.
it becomes difficult for them to let go. And we are power-drunk people. Maybe an admission we should have. We are power-drunk people to the point that, and I'll not be shocked, after all of this conversation, a team goes to meet him again. Then he starts issuing some of these deadlines, and he keeps moving the deadlines. You really need to make some of these things successful. Somebody who's not just a man of the people, somebody who's ideologically inclined to put the people first and is willing to let go of power as the person to leave office now. I don't see Doumbouya in that particular light. I see him as just like the time Rawlings came in. I'm angry about the system we're running. I want to change. How, when, with what, it's mostly unclear. And it leads to a long complication of the situation that you find yourself. We need a clear-cut understanding of the band gentleman's philosophy for running a state. And making sure that he leaves
which we still do not know what his philosophy is. And that's why I was talking about moving forward, what we can expect of Doumbouya. We don't know, and it's scary.
He's not like one of those very brilliant, what they call it, military officers who have spent quality time engaging in times past. So you know clearly that this gentleman is on the socially thinking. He believes that states ought to be run this way. He's going to let go of power and let in a system that will do this and that and that. He's not that kind. He's almost like the person who comes in and say, I don't like what's happening. Let's reverse it. How and when and how. And I agree with you. If ECOWAS sends in the best mediation team, they will help him find space. They will help him find how to navigate himself out of office or back into office with a proper system.
And Ray, that is in itself
mediation,
very, very tricky, because you know why? Sometimes they have the power and they don't even know how to let go of the power. And there are things they are afraid of. For example, if I cede power now, what are going to be the repercussions for me moving forward? The person, the civilian coming in, am I going to suffer consequences? And so all of that must be put into proper perspective, else they would not want to see.
And there are very wonderful people still in the sub-region who can help do that nicely, except that mostly partisan interest from even other countries makes it difficult. So, for example, you can have, let's say, France looking at who will come and suit our interests, who will come and promote our interests. Whether the military man stays in office or not, who will come and promote our interest. Other countries may equally be interested in knowing how can we go in to build our own interests.
Right.
State interest would have devastating effect on Guinea now. Mindful of the person involved. And I'm also thinking that the current military leader could have a certain backing, which is quite unclear to me now. That backing would have an intellectual source that wants to do something to the country Guinea that's not got an opportunity to do now. Power gets all kinds of people attracted to it. They come with different interests. And I'm hoping that the Ecowas mediation team will not go in and act like we don't care. We just want to pretend that something is happening. They should help the state get into proper action by helping the currently in charge to transition into something useful, or else it will be a spiral, what they call it, circuitous mode, where they make small progress and they come back to it. They make small progress and they come back to it. That's not the kind of thing we want now. You see, the people in our sub-region, the leaders, they have really dealt with the people in a terrible way. They have caused many problems. Others are making real progress. We are retrogressing by the period. And we pretend that we are making baby steps and we are fine.
And our sub-region, like you're saying, it's become very, I mean, within the last 20 years, no, 10, 15 years,
things we should
we've
not
been
be
the hotbed of coup d'etats.
Everybody is moving on, but we look like we are going back to the days that we thought we had made progress from. In fact, in the last 10 years, prior to the last 10 years, we would have been saying that, oh, well, we're making some progress. I mean, we are doing very well in other areas. But we are reversing it because there's still a disconnect between the old people running affairs and what the young people are moving and looking for going forward. And the interests of the young people have changed, but the promotion of the interests of the young people by the old people have
for fear of sounding ageist, which is not any of us want to do. But you remember that famous, or in some cases, infamous statement by Mo Ibrahim, British Sudanese businessman, billionaire, in fact, who said, well, so all of these countries in Africa, you have leaders, septuagenarians, octogenarians. I mean, remember the case up north with, I just forget his name, the Algerian leader, the one who was in a wheelchair. Bouteflika. You get it? Even, I'm not slighting anybody here, but when Mo Ibrahim says, where are all these leaders taking us? To the grave? Being sarcastic.
I mean, you've heard in recent times.
Being sarcastic with it.
Your Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni, talking about actually serving the interest of the youth. Unfortunately, I've seen...
and ask them whose interest is that?
Exactly. I mean, you see that famous quote that a good grandfather is one who plants a tree knowing that he's not going to benefit from the tree, but he's happy planting it because he knows that the next generation after him will be benefiting from it. And unfortunately, that is not something we have seen in a part of the world. Unfortunately, politics is seen as, it's seen as a Hindi in a lot of the instances. And so when people grow...
a bit of a zero-sum game, and once they assume power, it's all...
They get there, it is seen as an opportunity for them to relax, think about themselves, and no one else. Unfortunately, that is what we are faced with. So, yes, there's a lot of things to do, but I'm sure that as we have conversations about a constitutional review, we should also have a conversation about even an age limit on when one can be president. All of these things don't really help.
In Ghana, looking at the age cap, people have complained about that, but maybe just to support what you're saying, they get in there, relax, loosen their belts, and feed fat.
I actually think it should be left to the conscience of the people. Why is our population predominantly useful, and yet the people we elect are not useful?
And we'll be crossing over shortly, just to, as you can see on your feed, as they get ready, as the heads of state get in. But maybe I'll wrap up comments here before we cross over. this conflict in Guinea is bound to have ripple effects on the sub-region. And for me, my greatest fear, once people start seeing this happening in other countries, it's like what we avoid. Arab Spring. Yeah. Then it's a sort of precedent, and then people, especially young people and the military, feel, well, if it could happen here, and that is something we really need to avoid. And that is why we need to stem the tide of these coups in the bud now, once and for all, before it becomes a pattern, like in the 60s, like in the 80s.
I agree with you.
And so you can see right there in your shot some of those scenes there with some of the representatives from the sub-region, leaders and more converging right here in Accra. It's at the Kempinski Hotel. It's all about that extraordinary summit of ECOWAS on the back of the coup d'etat on the 5th in Guinea. Of course, Lieutenant Colonel Doumbouya taking or assuming the reins of power. But today, the ECOWAS leaders are converging to find out what next they are going to be doing about the Guinean situation. Timelines have been proposed, among others, about handing over power. We'll get the details as the heads of state have that in-camera meeting, meaning we're not going to hear exactly what they're going to say, but there's going to be a communication at the end of it on what decisions they arrive at. We'll come back into the studio and wrap right before, so when they are finally ready, we can take it up from here. So maybe what I made mention of, the consequences of these coup d'etats, what example they are setting, and how, if we are not careful, we could be laughing at the wrong ends of our mouths as far as leadership is concerned.
If you ask me, mostly I'm torn in between two things. On one hand, a lot has to change in our part of the world.
Office for West Africa and Sahel, honorable ministers, Your Excellency Mrs. Finda Koroma, Vice President of ECOWAS Commission, honorable commissioners, excellencies, the diplomatic corps, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Akwaba, welcome, bienvenue, bimvindo, dans la très chaleureuse ville d'Accra. Ce jour, jeudi 16 septembre 2021, se tient la session extraordinaire de la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de la CEDEAO portant sur la situation politique en République de Guinée et Mali. Il se tient présentement la cérémonie d'ouverture. L'agenda de cette cérémonie comme suit. Un discours d'ouverture de son Excellence Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, président de la République du Ghana, président en exercice de la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de la CEDEAO. Puis, la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement procédera en huis clos. I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the statement.
Excellencies, heads of state and government of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, members of the authority, representatives of member states, president of the ECOWAS Commission, the ECOWAS mediator in Mali, the special representative of UN Secretary General for West Africa and the Sahel region, fellow citizens, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome all of you to Accra once again, and I thank you for responding to the call without hesitation of coming to address a burning issue in the region. Last week, we met, albeit virtually, with our deliberations centering on the happenings in Guinea and Mali. We're met today for further urgent deliberations on events in those two countries. Your presence that is 8 presidents, 1 vice president, and 3 foreign ministers representing their presidents, at this second extraordinary summit on the political crises in Guinea and Mali is a clear manifestation of the solidarity and commitment restoration of constitutional order. The United Nations, the African Union, and several other countries outside the continent have also condemned the coup. In discussing this issue during our virtual conference of 8 September 2021, we reiterated our condemnation, suspended Guinea forthwith from membership of our organization, and decided to establish immediately to Guinea a high-level ECOWAS mission composed of the chairperson of the Council of States, the Ghanaian Foreign Minister, the Honorable Shirley Ayoko Boucher, the President of the ECOWAS Commission, His Excellency Jean-Claude Brou, the Foreign Minister of Burkina Faso, the Honorable Alpha Bari, and the Foreign Minister of Togo, the Honorable Robert Dussey, to assess the situation in that country and report back to us. The delegation went to Guinea on Friday, the 10th of September, met the military leaders, and saw President Alpha Condé in his place of detention. They have made a report to us, which will be the basis of our deliberations at this emergency summit on Guinea. We will receive also a report from the mediator of the Malian crisis, His Excellency Goodluck Jonathan, the former president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, on developments in Mali. We are required to take informed decisions on these matters that will have long-term consequences for the stability and the defense of the democratic values of our region. I count on you, Excellencies, to help proffer durable solutions to the crisis. And I'm confident that, as in the past, we will rise to the occasion. I wish us fruitful deliberations, and I thank you for your attention and declare this opening ceremony closed.
We thank His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana, Chairperson of the Authority of ECOWAS, Heads of States and Government, for his opening statement. This concludes the opening session of the Extraordinary Summit of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of States and Government on the political situation in the Republics of Guinea and Mali. The Authority of Heads of States and Government will now move into a strict closed-door session. At this point, we request for all media
Well, we're bringing you that special coverage of the Guinean situation. ECOWAS heads of states converging here in Accra. We take a break. We shall return.